maybe I told him. Not long after that, though, a plan was devised to get my brother and me out of the country because I guess my grandparents decided that this was not a sustainable situation. So 4 years after my mother left, we were reunited in California. I did not speak a word of English. And on top of that, my mother had actually remarried so that I had a new dad. We lived in a new house, and my grandparents returned to Korea. At best, this time of my life was chaotic with all the changes, but for the first time, I also didn't fear for my life on a daily basis. And in that new condition, in that new environment, I began to thrive. So from the age of 10 onward, my life had all of the hallmarks of worldly success. Graduated valedictorian in my high school, attended the top Ivy League schools for undergrad and medical school. I started and ran a biotech company that became a multi-billion-dollar company that saved lives, that employed thousands of people. I married the love of my life, and effectively retired in my early 30s. But aside from all of this, aside from being married to my wife, they were also the most unrelenting and probably the most anxiety-ridden years of my life. Because the more successes I had, the more I got it in my head that I was sufficient, that I didn't need to rely on anybody or anything, the more anxious I became. As my long-suffering wife knows, during these years, at least from a worldly perspective, I had everything: notoriety, money. But privately, I carried a pit in my stomach, a constant pressure on my chest. I was getting about 4 hours of sleep a night because as soon as I woke, I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep due to the worries that would flood into my head, which were all roughly rooted in this belief that I can't mess up because if I do, it will all go away. It turned out that effectively having everything did not give me the peace that I so longed for. Rather, I became more anxious over all the responsibilities and demands upon me. I really carried it. I really felt that every decision that I made affected thousands of people, if not more. And I began to think, who else could do what I do? Who else can provide for my family and for myself? Who else can help those in need? If I'm not perfect, how can I be this positive force in everyone's life? And there it was, the cycle of anxiety that never stopped. And wouldn't stop until I learned to look beyond myself for a solution. While I stand before you fairly confident that I know a lot about having anxiety, I definitely don't have everything figured out about how to not have anxiety. But I have thought about this and prayed on this a lot, and it's gotten better. So I hope to share a few learnings from my own experience and pray that at least some of it will be helpful to those here. Because anxiety is nothing new. It's been a part of our existence pretty much as long as people have been around. And perhaps the most obvious biblical example coming from the Gospel of Luke is the reading that we read on many of the great feasts of the Theotokos. In fact, on November 21st, right, for the entrance, we'll read this. The Gospel of Martha and Mary. the story of Martha and Mary. And so we know it all pretty well, right? You have two sisters, Martha and Mary. Martha works and works and works and prepares and serves Christ. And her sister Mary listens at Christ's feet. And when confronted by Martha, Christ describes Martha as anxious and troubled about many things. Now, just so that we're clear about the terminology here, there are two words being used here in Greek that I want to examine to understand what we're referring to when we talk about anxiety. When Christ says anxious here, the word that it is being translated from is merimnas in Greek, and troubled here is thorivazi. And merimnas comes from the word for care, concern, or worry. And this is an important thing, I think, to observe here because merimnas gets translated to English as both worry and anxious fairly interchangeably in the Bible. But, drawing from my own background here, in psychiatric care and in English linguistics, we often draw a distinction between worry and anxiety, with worry often being a temporary cognitive process, and we often say it's about specific things, and anxiety being more of an emotional, psychological response that is persistent and non-specific. So we like to think worry is temporary over specific things and anxiety as being a constant state. And for today's discussion, I want to challenge all of us to see both as merimnas, both as the same thing, because we often like to think that worrying over external things is normal, while anxiety is not. But the truth is, both result from the same internal sin, which is pride. The anxiety that Martha was feeling is very relatable to us. She wanted to make sure that everything was perfect for Christ. She wanted to labor over every detail, worried that it might not be perfect. Similarly, all of us, I think, have this same familiar feeling of being worried about things. Maybe we are worried about not knowing how to pay the bills next month. Or it's making sure that everything goes off without a hitch for our fall gathering or our parish life conference. Maybe it's worries that we can't live up to all of the demands on our time. Maybe it's worries about an upcoming interview or an exam. Maybe we're worried about letting someone down. That's something that gets me all the time. Or worried about how we will provide for our loved ones. For many years, for me at least, it was worrying about losing it all and ending up back in the streets again. And we like to think that this worrying is very natural and understandable because who wouldn't worry about these things? After all, isn't worrying about providing for our loved ones a good thing? Shouldn't we care? And this is where anxiety is a particularly challenging condition to overcome as Christians, because every good thing we start can become a point of pride. Because Martha, too, herself told herself that she was doing what was best for Christ. She thought she knew better about how to serve. And the truth is, she did prepare and she did serve. These were important things. But it's pretty amazing that we can make even serving others about ourselves. Rather than simply listening to Christ when he came, the little worries that she kept on holding on to spiraled into anxiety because things just didn't end up according to her plan, her idea of what serving was supposed to be. So in essence, the only difference between worry and anxiety is perhaps how long we decide that we know best, as opposed to God. The longer we feed our hearts the idea that we know better what is good for us, the more the worry becomes persistent and the intensity grows. And this is why anxiety can be so dangerous, because we can disguise it so well to ourselves. I was anxious because I believe that God delivered me from a hellish childhood so that I could cure cancer. Sure, I'm sure I started out for good reasons, but over time I made it about me more than about saving lives. When we feel to our core that we need to be making more money, we need more respect, we need to provide for our families in a certain way, we need that new car, we need to buy that house, that we need to impress our coworkers, that we need to do well in this or that interview to survive, we really genuinely believe it. It's so ingrained in us. For example, that we haven't settled down until we have bought a house. And if we haven't, then we haven't provided a home for our family. This conviction is so strong that we think we know this to be so true that we can't see beyond this truth in our hearts to see what God wants for us. We so believe in ourselves that we know best, and that how we feel is what we should be basing our lives around, that we literally tell each other, trust yourself. You know best. You'll know. You'll feel it when it's right. Rather than what we should be saying, just simply trust in God. Our society has generally been moving to replace God with ourselves for, at least systemically, for the last few decades. And it's very subtle, if you think about it, right? How many times have we seen characters on TV shows, and maybe they're even like best friends, right? They're like good people saying to each other, just trust yourself. How many times have we seen them say, you know, I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't feel right to me. I'll know when it feels right. It's these types of really subtle messaging that sounds right to us, but is really excising God from our lives and leads us away from Christ's feet onto being anxious about many things. Effectively, we made ourselves into God. And once we think we know best, it's really hard to go back to listening to others, let alone God. And the biggest issue with being our own God is that we become rudderless, because our hearts, who we are, and what we believe in are so easily influenced. Our hearts are a reflection of what we feed it. And we think this anxiety has been on the rise because we now dictate to ourselves what good looks and feels like. So in the post-war era, after World War II, it was actually quite common to see TV ads where they would portray housewives as not being good moms if she didn't provide specific things to her children. Gerber Baby Foods, right, had ads with literally taglines saying, "Isn't your baby worth the best?" Lysol disinfectant said, "Be sure you're doing your best for your family." In the 60s, it was Listerine that had a slightly different message. It's the same underlying message, right? Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. In the 70s, it was deodorant that described itself as the essence of man. In the 80s, it was public service announcements of following protocols to survive the bomb because angels can't stop nuclear. Today, it's Pepsi saying, live for you, live for now. All of these were designed with this subtle implication that you are ultimately in the driver's seat. And you're in control, but whatever you're doing currently is just not enough. And this trend has been exacerbated, sure, by the internet and social media, but only because it has now enabled us to advertise to each other these delusions, so that now the same message gets told us by our friends as opposed to some company. Everyone you know is happy, married, popular, successful, fit, important, so why aren't you? You can do anything that you put your mind to, so why aren't you doing it? You and you alone, and what you want is what ultimately matters, so go and take it. Feed yourself enough of this, and it becomes a part of you, and your core belief. So that when people say, trust in God, be thankful for whatever you have and wherever you are, or simply that God will provide, it just sounds wrong to us. It sounds fake. We don't believe it. I was fortunate enough to have in my youth Archimandrite Meletios Weber as my spiritual father. And he often cited to me, sort of paraphrase, one of the Desert Fathers, Abba Pullman, who said, "Do not give your heart to that which does not satisfy your heart." Well, we've literally been doing nothing but that. And this anxiety is affecting us even more in our modern times, because now 24/7 we're being told, you, not God, get to choose what is good, what is right, and simultaneously being told to feel that we are not yet where we are supposed to be. It's unrelenting. And I was thinking about this because when I was in school, something terrible would happen at school, and then I would come home and I would cry to my parents, and that would be the end of that. Today, a student comes home and will still be surrounded by people telling them you're not good enough through their phones and through the internet, through social media channels. So even our homes are not a safe space anymore. A person can only hear, you know best, you do you, and by the way, no matter what you have, you can always have more, only so many times before it really becomes foundational to them. But it goes even further than that, because today, as society at large has turned largely away from God, the concept of grace in society has also gone away. So consequently, the cost of making mistakes has gone up. Believe me, there are wildly negative articles about me online that you can find because of the various mistakes that I made throughout my career. Today, even saying trusting God can get you canceled, or you can become a meme or be ridiculed on the internet forever. Coming from Silicon Valley, I often think about the impact that technology has had on the world. The thing that you learn from just being surrounded by it all is that every new technology is kind of a double-edged sword. It's really not all good or all bad. For example, the internet and modern cell phones have enabled us to communicate broadly in kind of a one-to-many fashion. One tweet or one YouTube video can now reach millions of people. Without Zoom, Father Michael and Father Gregory Hogg and I probably would have never really met because we would not have been able to take our clinical pastoral education class together. So that's good. And while this technology also has saved lives because better communication, we can get to people quicker, medically speaking, things like that, it also created a huge problem that we're now just really seeing the impact of in the past decade. Because what technology has done is scales communication, but our ability to empathize with one another is still very much one-to-one. And this communication at scale without empathy has created this environment where our worst impulses have come out en masse. The consequences of this is that we're no longer allowed to fail. We're no longer allowed to make mistakes. Because if we do, because we weren't meant to empathize over great distances or at great scale, at best, we're going to be brutally ridiculed. But it can also lead to even more serious consequences, such as impacting our ability to make a living altogether. So we first told ourselves that we're God. We're the sole compass that we should follow. Then we told that compass to never point in the right direction. Always be looking. And on top of that, we created a society where we've literally paralyzed people from trying anything to change that by making it too risky to do anything. The perfect trap of anxiety. So how do we free ourselves from this? I often hear today, both pastorally and medically, all sorts of proposed cures for anxiety. Everything ranging from just don't go on the internet to there's a medicine for that. In my own parish, which resides in one of the most expensive zip codes in the country, it's often refrains like, if only I moved to Michigan or North Carolina, then I'll be able to afford a house and I will be happy. I will finally be able to provide for my family in the way that they deserve. But these solutions don't address the underlying cause. Because we think anxiety is caused by external things. It's because of the news. It's because we can't afford things. It's because we're surrounded by woke people. But these are all symptoms of our intrinsic desire to think that we know better. So to tackle anxiety, we have to tackle it on that level. To go back to the biblical example, it's not a mistake that we read this particular gospel story about Martha and Mary during most of the great feasts of the Theotokos. Because the very answer to Martha's anxiety is to do what the Theotokos does when the angel Gabriel comes to tell her about Christ. Let it be to me according to your word. In other words, anxiety only goes away when we let go of our pride and say, thy will be done. Say that every Sunday. Put not your trust in princes and sons of men, in whom there is no salvation, includes ourselves. Don't put our trust in ourselves. We fall under sons of men. We cannot trust ourselves in knowing what is good, because even if we feel that something is so right for us, it's more likely that that conviction is the byproduct of some self-adoring message that we receive 24/7. So we have to first start with realigning our hearts with God's will. And we do that by getting into the practice of reminding ourselves that it's not my will be done, it's thy will be done. And being the good Orthodox Christian people that we are, we know that the more we repeat this to ourselves, the more it will become a part of us. That's why we have so much repetition in our services. I did not get that job. What if I never find a job? Thy will be done. What if I can never afford a house, a car, a family? Thy will be done. What if I never find somebody to marry? Thy will be done. How will I survive after I retire? Thy will be done. For me, it was accepting that, yes, all that I have could be gone tomorrow because it really wasn't mine to begin with. So, thy will be done. Earlier this week, I was feeling anxious about giving my talk on anxiety. What if I say something stupid? What if I lead people astray? What if people don't like me? Thy will be done. This is the first step to realigning ourselves to God so that we can begin to discern better. The world tells us to live for you, live for now, constantly, which means we need to tell ourselves, thy will be done, and come to church to be with God at least more than how much we're being told the other thing. Because our hearts are that impressionable. To be clear, saying God's will be done is not code for don't do anything. Remember, it's the world that wants us to do nothing, right? It's too risky to do anything. Martha began a good thing. She prepared and she served. Without her, nothing may have been ready for Christ. Similarly, if Father Michael and the parishioners of this church didn't labor for us to prepare for this event, there would be no event. If we didn't act in our lives, there would be nothing for God to bless. If we didn't set up the choir books, our liturgy would suffer. If people don't prepare for coffee hour, we may not gather as long. If priests and deacons don't get out of bed on Sunday mornings, there will be no liturgy. If Father Jeremy doesn't travel and work for this diocese, we will all be worse off. And no amount of saying God's will be done at his chancery in Toledo would do any good if he doesn't labor. So we give so much flack to Martha, but in reality, we must labor like Martha, but with the spirit of Mary. We work hard, we sacrifice, we do everything that we can to provide for our loved ones, and when it inevitably doesn't turn out the way we envision, then it's time to sit at Christ's feet and say, thy will be done. But as we've talked about, knowing when the time is right to turn from being Martha to Mary is often difficult to know ourselves. Our hearts are really bad at telling that. But that's why we have the body of Christ. We rely on each other to look out for our blind spots. Because it's actually easier to see when someone else has gone too far in believing that they can do it all than it is to see for ourselves. So, if you've been zoning out for the past 10, 15 minutes while I've been talking to you, listen just for this one moment. If anxiety is getting the better of you, do not try to tackle it alone. Don't be like me for so many years who felt that I couldn't reach out to anyone because I had to be strong, because too many people relied on me. If you are that person, like I was and still am sometimes, that comes home at the end of the day and groans when your wife or husband asks you, how's your day? Because you just don't know where to start. Be bold and start anyway. Like, act. The world doesn't want you to, but you have to. Reach out to your loved ones, your spiritual fathers, your spiritual mothers. Because after you've done everything that you can do, you really need someone to help you believe that it's no longer in your hands, but God's. And then, once we begin to believe it, or maybe even if we don't, we can start reminding others when they are struggling. Instead of telling our anxious friend, maybe they have some, exam coming up, maybe some important interview or something like that. Instead of telling them, you'll do great, believe me, that does not help with their anxiety if you tell them, you'll do great, right? Or like, don't worry, you're amazing. That also doesn't help. Perhaps we can say, no matter what happens, God's will be done, and I love you. What if I, fail my test next week? God's will be done, and I love you. What if I can't save my parishioner from this mistake? God's will be done, and I love you. What if I lose my job? God's will be done, and I love you. What if I don't know what I want to do with my life? God's will be done, and I love you. And maybe if you tell them and show them that enough times, they'll start believing it too. It may really seem like a little thing, right? Maybe too little. What does that do? But sometimes so does saying, Lord, have mercy in isolation. But if we say it 50 or so times, then we get the Divine Liturgy. So, too, we must have the boldness to remind ourselves daily that we really do need to submit our will unto God by believing that His will outweighs our own. And on a societal level, we really need to do what we can to decrease the cost of mistakes, especially among our youths, so that they can be willing to try and change their perspective from me first to God first. And even this daunting task starts with something very small. For example, every time we read a story about someone failing, saying something stupid or doing something stupid, we can on one hand laugh and gossip and give people more reasons to write more stories about those people failing. Or we can say, Lord, have mercy upon them and upon us. When we see someone in our community make a mistake, we can be the one that talks to them when no one else will. We can be the ones to give them a hug when everyone else avoids them. These small acts will cause those around us, especially our children, to begin believing that, hey, we won't laugh at them when they fall, when they fail. It's okay to try and love God, even though everyone around them, and even them themselves, may feel that it's the wrong thing to do. What I've learned in so many years of flying high, if you will, is that the move towards God or away from God happens step by step, day by day, and often subconsciously. For example, for me, being surrounded by rich, powerful people of Silicon Valley, I took small steps away from God daily. Little steps. I would literally be in conversations where they would talk about how they were going to change the world, how they knew exactly what they needed to do to make the world a better place. I remember I was over at one of these people's houses in 2008 when people were just like losing their livelihoods, their houses. And behind these closed doors, they were exuberant because they said they know that chaos in this economy breeds the biggest financial opportunities if you know how to take advantage of them. The first time I heard it, I said, this is nuts. This is crazy. The second time I heard it, I said, this is ridiculous. The 50th time I heard it, I said, yeah, I think I see your point. That's why who you spend time with is so important. Why the little actions that we take to remind people around you will be so powerful. Because the first time you say to yourself, thy will be done, you may not believe it. The second time you say to someone, God's will be done and I love you, you may think, oh, that sounds hokey. But the 50th time you say, Lord, have mercy upon them and upon us, you may just convince someone that God really loves them regardless of their many faults. You may not believe that you can have that much of an impact. But if it helps, remember the one time that Theotokos said, thy will be done, she enabled the Savior of the world to save all of us. Sometimes it only takes that one time. May Christ our true God, through the example of his mother, the Theotokos, guide all of us to lay aside all worldly cares and grant us the humility to be led by him, always, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen.
Thanks so much, Deacon Gabriel. Beautiful words that we can all easily put to practice in our lives and gain a rich blessing from that. So thank you very much. And thank you to Father Anthony Gilbert, who has been serving for us our services during the Clergy Synaxis and then this morning as well. And welcome to everyone. I saw many of you yesterday. We had a good conversation, question and answer time. I'm going to look forward to seeing you in your various meetings throughout the day. I'm Father Jeremy Davis, by the way, your new Archiepiscopal Vicar, overseeing the diocese. We all, of course, miss Bishop Anthony so much, but I'm trying to fill his shoes as much as I can by your prayers. Let's see, do we have any announcements, Deacon Justin? Okay.
All right. So as you're leaving, as you know, we have our various meetings coming up now. If you'd like to stop, though, quickly and grab some coffee or apple cider or snacks, those are available in the gathering room. For our clergy who are leaving right now, if you have children and that you need to retrieve, we have signs up in the atrium that will show you where they are. But the younger kids, preschool through third grade, are in the conference room, and then the fourth through sixth graders are all the way around the corner, basically right in that hallway over there in one of the classrooms. So if you follow the signs out in the atrium and down the hallway, you'll be able to find your kids. We're not hiding them from you, I promise. Also, if you could please, Reverend Clergy, as you leave, take your lanyards, take the name tags out of them, and we have baskets at both main entrances in the atrium and back by the back parking lot. If you could just drop your lanyard in there, the little clear plastic area, so that we can hold on to those and use them for Vacation Church School. Yes? Oh, lanyard. Please take the name tag out and then just put the rope and the lanyard inside. After you grab refreshments quickly, we'll have our meetings. The teens will be in the chapel. The young adults are in the teen room. The men will be in Heritage Hall, or the soft seating past the atrium, and the Antiochian women will be in the Cultural Center, or the large ballroom. And of course, that's on the signs as well in the atrium if you need a reminder. Anything else, Father? All right. Thank you so much again, Reverend Deacon. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Thank you.
Guys, why would we take a photo right here?